Hi, and welcome back to Focal Point AAFR Talk. Happy to take your calls, your comments on what you know about Robert Gates. I think I called him Bill Gates in the last segment. It's Robert Gates or Bob Gates, former Secretary of Defense. His memoir, his assessment of Bush, his assessment of Obama, and I'm going to get into what I think is an incredibly damning assessment of Barack Obama, President Obama. And this is coming from a former highly placed member of the Obama administration. This is virtually unheard of. This is virtually unheard of. It's extremely rare for somebody who has just been in a position of high political power and office, chosen by to come out with a hit piece like this. I mean, there's no other way to look at this as a severe criticism, severe condemnation of Barack Obama. This is exceptionally rare for somebody to do this, and the conclusion I draw from that is that Gates would not have done this if he didn't think that things were really, really, really bad. We've got another 3 years, remember, with this commander-in-chief. Now, here's the part I want to get to. I started talking about it in the last segment, but here's the part that I want you to react to. I'm going to revisit this. The number to call is 888-589-8840, 888-589-8840. And here's what Bob Wood, this is the opening paragraph in his piece on Bob Gates' memoir called Duty. Robert Gates says this is what he wrote, that by early 2010, he had concluded, quote, the president doesn't believe in his own strategy and doesn't consider the war to be his. He goes on to say the president was skeptical, if not outright convinced, that that is his plan to deploy an additional 30,000 troops in Afghanistan, he was convinced it would fail. Now here to me is what's inexcusable. This is absolutely inexcusable to me, is you have a president who is making wartime decisions that put young American lives at risk. Our finest young men, finest young women, strongest, most patriotic, most valorous, most courageous people we've got, they're willing to be deployed to some far-flung corner of the world, ostensibly to serve the purposes of our national defense and our national security. And yet President Obama deployed them for purely political reasons. He didn't want to be perceived as weak on terror. So because he didn't want to be perceived as weak on terror, because of his concern for his image, his reputation, desire to project himself as strong, decisive, and forceful, he put the lives of every man and woman, every soldier under his command, put them at risk for his own political advantage, pure and simple. He didn't think it would work. Now, we have no obligation to be in Afghanistan. That this is a purely elective decision on his part to ramp up and put an additional 30,000 soldiers to put their lives at risk in Afghanistan, when he is convinced in his heart of hearts it's not a good strategy. He doesn't believe in the strategy. According to Robert Gates, who would know because he's in meetings all the time with President Obama, with the commander-in-chief formulating strategy, so he's in a position to know that President Obama did not believe in his strategy. He was convinced it would fail. It would not work. These 30,000 troops would be sent into harm's way, improvised explosive devices, grenades, rocket-propelled grenades, ambush from the Taliban, sending him in there for his own purely narcissistic political reasons. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if Robert Gates is right, again, I'm going to put that caveat here, but if Robert Gates is right, and I have no reason to doubt what he's saying here, if Robert Gates is right, then this is reprehensible on the part of the commander-in-chief. It is, Debbie, my wife, used the word heartless. It is heartless of the president to do this. It is cruel, and it is utterly inhumane because people are dying over there In fact, in Afghanistan, our casualty rate is 3 times the rate that it was under President Bush. The great majority, I think we're well over 70% now, over 70% of the casualties in Afghanistan have come under President Obama's watch. President Bush took us in there. President Obama has kept us in there. And the great majority, over 2/3 of the casualties, have come under President Obama's watch. And, you know, even Bob Woodward, I mean, this guy's hardcore leftist. He says this is one of the more serious charges that a defense secretary could make against a commander-in-chief, that he didn't believe in his own mission. So he was sacrificing our best young men and women as cannon fodder for his own purely political objectives and motivations. Now, there's a telling, you know, and I find that reprehensible. I find that inhumane. I find that heartless and cruel. I mean, what kind of a man would do that? These are people. These are people of flesh and blood. These are people that have wives and have children and have parents back in the States. These are families and people who are devastated when they die on a foreign field of battle, and he doesn't even believe they're over there for a good purpose. Doesn't even believe in the mission, but he's perfectly willing, so he won't be perceived as weak in the war on terror. He's perfectly willing to lay down the lives of 30,000 other people, 30,000 young men and women in uniform for his own image. I do not have a word that can express the level of contempt that I have for that kind of decision making. Now, you know, and Gates talked in his memoir about the fact that Bush and Obama were completely different in the way that they went about waging war. Here's what he says. This is fascinating to me, but it's very telling. I don't recall Bush ever discussing domestic politics as a consideration in decisions he made during my time with him. So it says when it came to what we were doing in Iraq, what we were doing in Afghanistan, Bush never, ever, not a single time, discussed domestic politics, because his concern, and I disagree with Bush, I think his objective was wrong, but there is no question that his intention was to protect the security and safety of the American people. That's what drove him. That's the only thing that mattered to him. And he was only willing to send troops into harm's way if he honestly, truly, in his heart of hearts, believed it was necessary for our national defense. He didn't care about the domestic fallout. He didn't care what this was going to do for him politically. But with Obama, Gates says, I joined a new, inexperienced president determined to change course, and listen to this, equally determined from day one to win re-election. Domestic political considerations, therefore, would be a factor. And he says he didn't think these political factors were decisive, but he says they would be a factor, and I think probably decisive. I think they were decisive. I think Gates is, being, too kind there, too generous. They were decisive for this is all politics for him, because Hillary Clinton. He's got another passage in the book. I don't have time to get to it right now, but another passage in the book where Hillary and Obama are talking in front of him, and Hillary says that she opposed or supported the surge in Iraq for purely political reasons. She was running against him in the primary 2007, and Obama says, yeah, that's the reason I supported it too, for purely political reasons. So again, national security issues, national defense, not a part of the equation for them. It's entirely a matter of their personal political careers. And I just have I don't have words that could go low enough to express the level of disregard and contempt I have for that kind of decision-making, because these are American lives that are being put at risk. It's one thing, if you're running a risk of losing a campaign and it's a matter of votes. We're not talking about votes here. We're talking about people's lives. And Gates says, look, Bush never talked about domestic fallout, domestic complications, but the Obama administration, it was about re-election from day one. And what Gates says is core political advisors were in on every one of these decision-making meetings. Valerie Jarrett, she doesn't know thing one about national security or the military. David Axelrod, that guy's clueless about the military. Robert Gibbs, that guy's clueless about the military. And yet they had a central role in all of these national security decisions. Now, here's the part that I want to get to, because this confirms something that I have talked about a number of times. And he says, Bush enjoyed his interaction with the military commanders. He respected them. He admired them. He enjoyed the give and take with them. Didn't always agree with them. But he says President Obama was not like that around these guys. He was suspicious of them. He distrusted them. Everybody in his administration distrusted them. Obama was deeply suspicious of their actions and recommendations. Bush seemed to enjoy the company of the senior military. I think Obama considered time spent with generals an obligation. Now, here's the thing that's really telling to me. For too many people, Gates says, including defense experts, members of Congress, executive branch officials, and I would include President Obama because I think this fits him, executive branch officials, including Barack Obama, I would add, and ordinary citizens, for too many people, war has become a kind of video game or action movie, bloodless, painless, and odorless. And I honestly think that that's the way that President Obama seems to view combat. It's like Sim City. It's like Sim War. It's a simulated war. And these are just avatars on a screen. They're not real people. They're not real flesh and blood. They don't die in agony and bleed and leave behind devastated and broken families. They're like pixels on a screen. It's Sim City on the battlefield. And Gates is saying exactly the same thing, and he was up close and personal, so he confirms something that I've said for some time, that for President Obama, this war on terror, it's like a video game to him. It's like an arcade game, Sim City, on the battlefield, bloodless, painless, and odorless. And you look at President Obama's fascination with drones. I mean, drone, that's a video game. You watch, I'm not saying it's bad. I'm not saying the use of drones is bad. But I'm saying if you're in there, you're in the sit room, and you're watching a drone strike, I mean, it's like a video game. There's the drone missile going through the sky, and then there's the explosion, and boom. And you don't see the people. You don't see the carnage. You don't see anything. I'm not saying it's all wrong, but it just fits into the scenario that for President Obama, these aren't real people. They're just pixels on a screen. Focal Point, AFR Talk.